Lanarce, France, 1831. On a cold October evening, a horse trader named Antoine Enjolras knocked on the door of an isolated roadside inn. He had spent that day scouring the hills of southern France for a lost cow, and after a long day of searching without success, decided he was too tired to make the long walk home. More than anything, he wanted a hot meal and a warm bed, so he chose to spend the night at l'Auberge de Petit-Bay, or the Inn of Petit-Bay, and return home in the morning. But Antoine would never see his home again. He would meet a violent end inside the inn that night, and his death would be the final chapter in a gruesome story of robbery, murder, and cannibalism at l'Auberge de Petit-Bay, now known to history by another name, l'Auberge Rouge, the Red Inn. The official investigation into the Inn of Petit-Bay started with a fire. Several sawmills in a nearby city were burned to the ground during the night, and certain members of the peasant class were the primary suspects. The French government had recently passed a law banning the collection of firewood from French forests, with the explanation that greater quantities of wood were needed for local sawmills. Many peasants depended on a freely available supply of firewood, and since they could do nothing to increase the supply of wood to the sawmills, they simply reduced its demand. The fires were a message to the ruling class, and French officials were concerned that if law and order were not re-established quickly, the fires of revolution might spread from those sawmills to the rest of France, and those same officials might find their own necks under the blade of a guillotine. So when the authorities learned of the disappearance of Antoine Enjolras, they dispatched a local justice to investigate and to show the peasant class who was really running the show in that troubled region of southern France. The justice eventually found his way to the Inn of Petit-Bay, where he spoke with the innkeeper, a man named Pierre Martin. Pierre Martin, pictured here in his death mask, had owned and operated the Inn of Petit-Bay for the better part of 20 years. He also moonlighted as a paid henchman for the aristocracy, helping the French nobility to acquire cheap land from desperate farmers, and for this, he was feared and hated by his neighbors. Pierre told the justice he had not seen anyone matching the description of the horse trader, and that no one by the name Antoine Enjolras had registered at the inn. Pierre Martin's wife Marie verified his story, as did their nephew André and their servant Jean Rocher. But the justice remained unconvinced, and rather than take Pierre at his word, decided instead to search the surrounding hills for clues. His hunch was proven right when Antoine's body was found on the shore of the Allier River, a short distance away from the Inn of Petit-Bay. The man's leg had been badly broken, and his skull smashed by a blunt object. How he ended up there, however, was a mystery. Had the man been thrown from his horse and badly injured in the fall, or waylaid by a highway robber as he bent down for a drink of water? Both were reasonable theories, and had there been no evidence to suggest otherwise, the justice might have settled on one or the other. But there was one more piece of evidence to consider: a witness to the crime, who came forward to tell his story, and had it not been for his testimony, the crimes of the Inn of Petit-Bay might never have been discovered. On the night of Antoine's murder, a beggar named Laurent Chaz knocked on the door of the inn, looking for shelter from the evening chill. Pierre Martin disliked beggars and turned Laurent away, demanding the man remove himself from the premises. Instead, the beggar hid inside the inn's tool shed, finding the meager shelter preferable to no shelter at all. Laurent watched from his hiding place as the horse trader trudged warily up the road and knocked on the door of the inn. He watched as Pierre Martin greeted his newest guest, ushering him inside and closing the door behind them. And he later watched as the lifeless body of Antoine was carried out in a cart by Pierre and two accomplices, who would later be revealed as Pierre's nephew André and his servant, Jean Rocher. The three men carried the body down the road in the direction of the Allier River, talking softly amongst themselves before disappearing into the night. The beggar Laurent would spend the rest of that sleepless night in silence before slipping away unnoticed in the early morning. Pierre and Marie Martin, their nephew André, and their servant Jean Rocher were arrested, and Les Quatre Amants, or the Four Monsters, were taken to face trial. More than 100 of their neighbors were called to testify for the prosecution, and it was their testimonies which shed light on the crimes that allegedly occurred at the inn. Witnesses said Pierre used his trusty mallet to crush his victims' heads while they slept, and then robbed and disposed of the bodies. Others said that the landlady Marie butchered her victims' flesh and served it to clueless guests, using only the best pieces of human meat for her stews. One farmer claimed to have seen human hands simmering in a pot, while other witnesses reported walls stained with blood and smoke, and a sickening smell from the inn's chimneys resulting from the fiery disposal of their dead customers. The prosecution argued that no less than 50 people had met their end at l'Auberge de Péribet, the victims of robbery and murder at the hands of the Martins and their servant. The Martins' lawyer argued that the witness testimony was unreliable, as the Martins were roundly disliked, and many of their accusers would be happy to see them punished for crimes they did not commit. The Martins' lawyer also dismissed the beggar's testimony as unreliable, arguing that the man was a known drunk and a dullard, and could therefore not be trusted. The lawyer representing the servant Jean Rocher, however, tried a different strategy. He argued that his client was indeed a murderer, but only murdered at the insistence of his masters. This strategy proved unwise, and the lawyer's argument likely contributed to their conviction. Pierre Martin, Marie Martin, and Jean Rocher were found guilty of only one murder, that of the horse trader Antoine Enjolras. André Martin, Pierre's nephew, was found not guilty and was released without charges. The three murderers were returned to the scene of their crime for execution, where they were shocked to see 30,000 people in attendance, a dream come true for any innkeeper under different circumstances. A guillotine was constructed in front of the inn. The church bells signaled noon, and one after the other, the murderers were led to their decapitation. When it was Jean Rocher's turn, he cried, "Cursed masters, what have you not made me do?" All three were beheaded, and there was a great celebration afterward by those in attendance. Today, a stone with a red cross marks the spot of their executions, a grim monument to l'Auberge de Péribet, or as it is known today, l'Auberge Rouge, the Red Inn.